Everyone, thank you for this incredible attendance, and thank you for taking the time to invest in your own education and your flying and safety and those that you work with. I assume everyone is reasonably familiar with me, but if you don't know who I am, my name's Trent Robinson. I'm an examiner up here in Darwin. I've been up here about 6 years now, and love flying with everybody. I love flying up in the territory. Show of hands, who's new to Darwin? Awesome. All right. So from the survey, when I put out the tickets, it was about 70% of you that have never flown here before. Who's just starting IFR flying and are here to find out from an IFR perspective? Proper IFR, yeah. Flight plan and all. Awesome. All right. So this evening is being put together because I found out that CASA were not actually putting together a seminar this year. And I thought, well, what do you guys want to do? And speaking to a few of the operators, everybody thought, no, look, we've got so many new pilots here, we need to do something. So I thought rather than do something individually, we'll get everyone together. So like I said, this has been put together. A couple of you, thanks for putting it on and the food and how come I didn't have to pay. This is why. So the RAAA, the Regional Aviation Association of Australia, they've been fantastic. They've sponsored the room tonight and took away the cost of that for me. So that was fantastic, plus myself, of course. And then the awesome support from Chart Air, Jetstream Electrical, Top End Civil, Territory Air Services, Outback Spirit, who I forgot to put their logo on, sorry guys, and Air Frontier have all jumped on and covered the food platters tonight. So thank you to all those companies for supporting this and supporting me. So part of the process tonight, is everyone cool with the screen with the lights? I just wanted to double check, yep. So part of the process tonight is we want to have a bit of a look at what is the wet season, this thing we keep hearing about. I'm sure you've got a rough idea, but from a flying perspective, it's very different compared to standing on the ground and looking at the pretty lightning. We'll have a bit of a look at the types of thunderstorms, the local weather patterns, what it's like then operating in the wet from a VFR perspective, an IFR perspective, and towards the end we'll start getting through a few scenarios, some videos, photos. I've got a whole heap of stuff in here, and Darwin procedures. I'm a ask a question as we go along kind of guy, because if you leave it to the end, you'll probably forget. Also very grateful for James Madden from 452 Squadron, look after the tower there. He's also here tonight to help from an air traffic control perspective as well. That photo, I was on the ground at home too, by the way, when I grabbed that. All right, so like I said, there's a lot of us here. This is our first wet season. The interesting thing is it could be your passengers' first wet season as well. And part of what we're doing is we're up the front, panicking, a bit nervous, comfortable, however we're feeling. But our passengers sometimes are completely oblivious. Now I remember one of my first IFR flights, I was in Perth and heading down to, there's two of us, I was in the Part Navia and another friend of mine was in the 310 and heading down to Margaret River. Now Margaret River didn't have an approach at the time. And when I say approach, there's none of this GPS RMP stuff. It was all NDBs and VOR approaches. So we had to do a bit of a letdown procedure, which was we'd drop into Bustleton, come down, and then loosely use the term scud run at 1,000 feet or so down to Margaret River. The problem was the cloud was getting lower and lower as we approached Margaret River. Now I was IFR, so I always had the opportunity to punch up, but we didn't have Bureau of Met phone radars and all this other sort of information. I'm sitting here, dropping down lower and lower. My friend in the 310, he just landed. So I'm like, right, he got in, I'll be okay. And of course there's that, I was watching every 0.1 of a mile leading into Margaret River. And each one, the time it took to tick over seemed to take forever. And eventually went down and down and down. I'm looking at the trees and everything else instead of the altimeter and going, all right, I'm about ready to punch up. And then finally, there was Margaret River Airstrip. All right. The reason I'm telling you that is because I was like you. But everyone behind me, they were chatting, having a great time. I'm here shitting myself. And they didn't know the danger I was potentially putting them in. All right? And this is part of our responsibility as pilots, to make sure that we stick within our means and we educate ourselves like we are tonight. So that's what we're here to discuss. So typical wet season. We're pretty much just kicking it off. As we've all noticed, there's a bit of a change in the air, isn't it? We're a bit of humidity, not so much humidity. Today was a bit drier, a bit hotter. We're going up and down like a yo-yo. There's no real relief, there's no real rain. Like any change in the season, we got some 50 odd mil of rain a couple of weeks ago. It's just like, hey, I'm here, but not quite. And then it goes back to whatever the current season is. And it starts to roll in. And this is what we call the build-up. It's relatively hot, relatively unpleasant. You get the odd shower or two. It's usually when you go to the prep markets. It just drains just enough to heat up the hot bitumen and then steam everybody. Nasty. As we move through towards November, things start to settle in a bit more. The storms start to get a little bit more routine, a bit regular through December. And then, depending on what's going on, December, January, we hit the monsoon period. That will typically run through to March, April. All right. Now, I won't go into exactly what the monsoon is because I've got a whole section on it, but imagine a winter down south, but just warmer, okay, and bigger raindrops. That's pretty much the monsoon. Right the way through, traditionally from around December onwards, then we're into our cyclone season, okay, and depending on a whole number of factors, the rates and risks of cyclones goes up and down. All right, so we'll have a look at all of that. So some radar examples. We've got the build-up on the left there. Fairly isolated storms. Sometimes they do group together in what's called multi-cells. We'll talk about that in a second. And then once the monsoon comes through, it's more widespread rain, sometimes embedded storms, sometimes not. Sometimes it's just cloudy and rainy, but low cloud, which obviously causes problems for us VFR. Then we have a monsoon break where things start to back off a little bit, and it's almost semi-build-up conditions sometimes. All right, fairly isolated storms, not much rain and relief, sort of gets hot. Now, which way has the wind been blowing the last few months? Great. I just land on 2.9 or 1.1. Yeah, all right. So as we get through to December, January, and now November, you'll start seeing we're getting runway 29 show up a lot more. All right. Who did an ILS the other day? That was exciting, wasn't it? Everyone's on current again. Excellent. All right. So then we start getting storms that start coming in over the water. All right, which is really working into what builds a thunderstorm, where the heat sources are, the moisture sources and all that. And we can have nocturnal storms, so we have maritime storms, and we have land-based storms. All right, thunderstorms in the top end. So what sort of thunderstorms have we got? There's three main classifications. Anybody? Big ones, little ones. All right, lucky you all came, eh? All right, so we've got three main types. We've got ordinary or single cell storms, we've got our multi-cell storms, and then we've got the don't go flying, for real storms, the supercells. Thunderstorms in Darwin. Has everyone heard that Darwin is a bit of a hot spot for thunderstorms? Okay, we have the most thunderstorm lightning days in Australia, upwards of 80, on average 80 days a year. All right, and I remember when I got here in 2018, the first Christmas, I got here on the 20th of December, and the 25th of December is Christmas night, and it was flashing, like, you know when you watch a TV sitcom and like the SFX guys going crazy with the strobe out the back? But it was absolutely like that. We had some, I can't remember, 100-something thousand plus strikes one night or something. It was ridiculous. All right, so a lot of lightning activity all through Darwin, and it does extend down through into Catherine. All right, so typically where are the storms coming from? As I said, the land is hot during the day, so that's our our heat source. So it's usually afternoon storms over land, and that's what we see coming from the southeast and pushing up through to Darwin. And then more in the evening and early morning is where we get those overnight maritime storms. All right, who's done CPL, ATPL, MET lately? What are the ingredients for a thunderstorm? What do we need? Unstable atmosphere.
Trigger action.
What? A trigger? Yep. And moisture. All right. So have a think about where around Darwin there are moisture sources. All right. Who's been flying around the Adelaide River? What's all around the Adelaide River? Wetlands. Not so much at the minute, but very, very soon. Okay? Where do a lot of the storms come from the southeast? Over that area, isn't it? What about down over Finnis Riverway? What have we got down there? Wetland. Where's the other big storms around Darwin? Down there. Okay? So we can start to predict by local geographic features and that sort of stuff where these conditions and weather patterns are maybe going to start to form. So I'm not going to go into this too much. It's all in Bob Tate, all right, but a typical single cell form develops, it goes up, then we start getting some up, some down. The mature stage is a sign of what? Rain. All right, when the rain starts coming down, that's when we know it's reached its mature stage, and then that's where it starts to dump the rain, and then it becomes a fully dissipating storm. How long does a thunderstorm typically last? An hour? Any other takers? It depends, yes. All right, half an hour to an hour depends on the size and the stability of it all, but typically about half an hour. But who's looked out there and watched a storm for much longer than that? All right. Welcome to the multicell. All right, so most thunderstorms you're going to see around Darwin are multicellular. All right, so they're a cluster of short-lived storms, but they're multiple cells that add to each other. And so we then start to see something like this, where one's building, one's collapsing, there's another one leading up in front of it and becoming the next part of the cell. So it almost becomes a perpetual storm. It keeps going and going. All right, that's just down near the care flight and the police air wing looking to the east. Right on right base for 2-9. It's always in the worst spot. All right, part of these storms then can join together and then they broaden and then they become a squall line. So this can be upwards of 50 to 100 miles wide sometimes. It starts becoming very, very difficult to go around, right, especially when we're doing our little 120, 130 knots. And we can't go over it, we can't go under it, and we can't go around it. All right. I'm not doing the next bit. All right, so this is a no-go, turn around, hold, find somewhere else to hang out for a little while. Unless you can get around it, unless you're on the fringes and you'd be able to navigate it and get around it that way. All right. So these squall lines are, as we all know what a squall is. We've all seen the YouTube videos and the deck chairs and stuff falling over, and we will rebuild stuff. All right, but that's not flying weather. We do not want to be caught in that sort of thing. All right, I've been at MKT. If you can't find where MKT is, there's Noonamar there. As aircraft have just touched down in the middle of several squalls, and I was like, I don't know if that aeroplane's going to stay on 3 wheels, but thank God it did. All right, but couldn't get into Darwin, dropped into MKT instead, but it was blowing hard. All right, so that was about the last point that they had to get on the ground. So this is what we're trying to avoid and not do. All right, if it all goes really bad, then we've got the supercell. All right, who's seen, more so in America, especially down the tornado belt and that, those amazing spinny rotationary kind of cells that go up. All right, that's a supercell. We do get them here occasionally, but they are the real nasty ones. All right, so As they come up, they're going to swirl. It's going to draw air in a rotational thing, so wind's going all over the place. You don't really know what's happening. And definitely something that we don't want to do. All right, so they will be up to 20 miles, 32 kilometres away. It's affecting, so definitely something we need to be cautious of. Here's an example of a smaller one coming in again from the east, heading towards Darwin. My drone didn't pan up at that point, but it did have all that features on top. It was quite spectacular. And I got a few people from Darwin that were at the Zen bar, took photos of that one and sent it to me as well. It was pretty impressive. All right, leading ahead of some of these cells, then you can get things like roll clouds. All right, so here's an example of, this is the Barren just on the northern GA there. And again, this weather coming through, I just sort of spotted it and quickly got the time lapse going. But just amazing. And you see a lot of these sort of clouds in New South Wales and Sydney and that sort of stuff as well. All right, so it's not just here, but these are signs of fun on its way. All right, so again, should I go now? Maybe not. So it goes without saying that these thunderstorm hazards are exactly that. All right, so sometimes we can't fly, sometimes we delay our flight, sometimes we just go, yeah, not today at all. We need to remember that this sort of weather, the turbulence, the updrafts, the downdrafts, 6,000 odd feet per minute, you've read the textbooks, it's all in there. We can get severe wind shear, rapid speed wind direction changes over small distances, right? And we'll talk about how that affects Darwin Airport in a minute. Severe icing, obviously in the storms, we can still get icing in Darwin, got to get up into the flight levels, all right? The King Air would ice up all the time. So it's absolutely conditions that we can still expect up here. During that monsoonal period, we get low cloud. All right, so it's typically 1,700, 1,800, 2,000 foot cloud. What's the terrain out to the east? Roughly 100 feet, 200 feet. Nothing much is there, isn't it? Until we get to Jabiru. Then what does it do? 1,200, 1,300 feet. So now we're 300, 400, 500 feet above the ground trying to get to Borroloola or something. Not ideal. Okay? Our choices now start becoming limited. Can we do it? Yeah, but what if? All right, that's what we've got to start thinking about. Not to mention, if there are the storms around, we can start getting that heavy rain and, of course, poor visibility. All right. Who's been in the dry season with the smoke? All right. It's pretty much the same, just swap it for rain. All right. I've seen a few airplanes rock back up here at the northern GA with beautiful new paint jobs, new chrome finish, silver polished. All right. Paint's completely stripped off. New little nose dome and leading edges usually. All right, so then associated with these storms is microbursts. Who's seen a microburst? Anyone for real? Yeah, little hands going up, yeah. All right. I remember sitting at Jandakot one day, there was a big storm over Armidale, which is just down to the southeast of Jandakot, and I was standing there with the chief flight instructor at the time, and we could just see it, and then this microburst came, hit the ground, and then we could see this dust and crap all starting to head towards us. And this was, what's Jandakot? It's about 12 miles away, I think it is, from memory. And then it went absolutely dead silent, and then it just went, it's like that movie Backdraft kind of sound. It was literally like that. I'll never forget it. And the aeroplanes all went on the ropes, and it was unbelievable. No time to do anything. All right, it was just fierce, but it's way over there. And that's the problem. It's a long way away sometimes. It's not right near you. All right, Virga. What's Virga? Yeah, all right. But that's an indication of the downdraft, isn't it? You've got the visible part at the top, but the rest of it, it's sort of evaporated and disappeared, but it's still there. All right, so we do not want to be flying under Virga. The precipitation, hazardous wind shear conditions, all that sort of stuff, it's really important, especially if we're coming into airports, that we report wind shear. we become a little bit normalised to things of, you know, rough into Tyndall or something like that, or here. You go, oh, that's just how it is. But we get overshoot and undershoot wind shear. That can be a bit of a problem. All right, so it's important we report that sort of stuff as well. The mechanics of a microburst, I'm sure you've heard of some of the accident reports and things that have happened, which then resulted in various airports getting wind vector measuring equipment at all parts of the airport to be able to detect this stuff, because it is a bit invisible at times. All right, but obviously if we're flying into the beginning, we're going to get that high speed wind. It's going to increase, we're going to pull the power back, we'll get into the downdraft and then get on the tail end side of it, then we're going to start pushing down and then we're already spooled down and then we've got to power back up again, and potentially too late, which is what we don't want. Here's a example sitting out at Kununurra. All right, so this is me in the passenger seat of an E-jet coming back, I can't remember, I was going to Broome. You can see the dust. Maybe part of a microburst, I think it was more of an outflow boundary, all right, which is another thing. So who knows what the outflow boundary is?
Where that falls into the air.
Yeah, so if you've got that air coming down out of the thunderstorm and then it starts to push out, so that's what's going to change the airflow. All right, and I talk about this, it was a really great example in one of my podcast episodes where it goes pear-shaped. And part of this process was the storm was right off the end of the runway. Duty runway was 29, but I could tell at any minute now it's going to be runway 11. I could see the dust blowing like this, and you can see, you know, it's really starting to pick up. If we have a look at the next slide, and I'll just skip forward through the takeoff a little bit. So we're just on downwind now, and then you'll start to see how far away the cell still actually is and the impact that it's having on the airport. And I knew it was reasonable because we backtracked, lined up and sat there for a bit. So what do you reckon the pilots were doing? Air North pilots can't answer. Having a coffee. What would you be doing? What equipment have you got to help you make a decision? Can we go? Windsock, yeah, but that's pretty self-explanatory. What would an aircraft like that have on board? Radar. Yeah. So the problem with weather radar on board the aircraft, it's fantastic, but it doesn't look backwards. So we need to line up on the runway, need to get the tilt right, have a bit of a look. How far is it? How thick is it? Because that's all I can see, isn't it? I can see the front part, but you can't really see what's behind it. Should I go right? Should I go left? All right, so that takes a little bit of time. Who flies an aircraft with weather radar that's serviceable? All right, who knows how to work it? Right? All right, so that's part of the problem. You can look at your phone, that will give you a bit of an idea. Most of the VFR bangers, that's what we're going to have to do. All right, but if we've got an IFR weather radar, then we could use that to help. But that's going to take some extra seconds on the runway too, isn't it? So we need to let the tower know that we're going to want, how long would you say, 20, 30 seconds?
30 seconds.
Yeah, 30-second delay on lineup. So we've got a second to have a look and make a final plan. All right, and we'll get back to that in a minute about storm avoidance for VFR traffic when we talk about Darwin ops, because there's something that you guys need to think about when you're doing your departures as well. Here's an example of a wet microburst, otherwise known as a rain bomb. And again, you can just see that not just airflow dropping, but also that moisture is just coming down, hitting the ground and boom, which obviously makes it a lot more spectacular. And that was sort of quasi close to what I saw at Jandakot that day. It just wasn't quite that wet. But definitely something you need to be mindful of. All right. So, that was just out of Port Keats. That one, that was about 25,000 feet on the way back from Port Keats. Or maybe not even 20. We would have been probably about 18 there. All right, but big bolts. Part of what I'll show you later on as well, but if you look at where the cell is, that's there. If you're a VFR flying under the cloud, this is where the lightning's coming out, comes up out the top into clear air, then pops out down the bottom in what we see. All right, but this is the sort of weather we need to be mindful of, and a really big cell. All right, so this is what you're going to see quite a bit. The cells coming up from the Jabiru, Oampelli area, feeding off all the wetlands, moving through the Adelaide River area, up that northwest kind of trajectory, directly at Darwin. And where does it end up? Right on top of 10 Mile Final, maybe just slightly south. Should we move the airport, James? All right, so during that build-up period, like I said, isolated storms, which is good because it makes it easier to navigate until it ends up right where I don't want it to be. All right, and this is the situation that I had the other day, which I posted on Instagram and talked about there. It wasn't threatening or anything, but it was just the storm in the wrong spot at the wrong time, really close to last light, that could have just meant we almost didn't make it into Darwin. All right, now I'm night rated and all that, so it wasn't going to be an issue, but for some of you that might be the case. You haven't got the option to downgrade. You've got passengers on board, you might be fully rated, you could be instrument rated, but you can't utilise that. It's not an emergency in that sense. You'd have to divert somewhere. All right. So these storms can be narrow, isolated, they can be thicker. There's obviously potential rain to deal with that. It depends on the phase of the storm. What phase of storm are we looking for rain? Mature stage, good. All right, and then obviously the associated lightning. And the more active the storm, the more lightning. There can be more updrafts, downdrafts, the more friction, the more electrons rubbing together doing their thing, which creates the lightning. All right, towards the north, we've got Hector, otherwise known as Hector the convector. All right, so a big cumulonimbus storm, it'll start showing up with regularity, that didn't work out, did it? Regularity, roughly every afternoon, the normal 2-3 o'clock sort of mark, right during pickup and return to Darwin time, isn't it? So now we've got, who's starting out VFR? Put your hands up again. Yep. So you guys will mostly be doing some Tiwi runs and things. So you've got the double banger. You've got to deal with Hector on the way across, and then you've got to race the storms from the southeast coming back into Darwin. All right, and they said that was the easy job. What do you reckon everyone's going the other way? All right, so this is a very big storm. This is a large multicellular storm. This was supposedly named by World War II pilots. It was such a regular afternoon occurrence that it was like a beacon. They could go, right, there's the Tiwis, Darwin's just behind it. All right, now I have seen a few people trying to find some actual documentary evidence of that, but it's a cool story, so just roll with it. All right, so this is potentially what you're going to be greeted with. Who's seen Hector? Yeah. All right. So this is Bathurst Island just here. And as you can see by the radar image, Bathurst is usually just out of the picture. But Garden Point, Snake Bay, Pickataramore, Maxwell, they can be affected. So it makes things a little bit more awkward. So part of what we need to do is have a bit of a plan. What's going to happen by the time we get there? Is it going to move across, move there? Is it going to develop more or whatever? And then what's going on in an hour's time to the southeast approaching Darwin? These are all the decisions that we've got to start working through and try and figure out what's going to happen. So you can see, I forget how wide the Melville Islands are, but Melville Island is like the second or third biggest island in Australia, with the Tiwis, Bathurst Islands on the left, but that's covering the whole island. It's a big cell when it really gets going. Right. You can see some cell activity coming through. So this is Gun Point, this little section here, and Jacko's Junction is right about there. If we have a look at the Tiwis there in this satellite image, you can see how quickly it builds and pretty much takes up the whole island. So there's just some times where, sorry, but tiwis are a no-go. Can't get there today. If you do get there, then this is what you'll end up doing as well, sitting on the ground, reenacting a scene out of Titanic, fogging up the windows, trying to stop the rain coming in. All right, it's really, you can't open the door because you're getting drenched, but you've got to have some airflow because yeah, it gets really hot. You can't see, you can't take off on that, and depending on what equipment you've got, you don't know what's going on just to the north. All right, you can hear it banging and thunderstorming with the engines going and everything else. So you've got to choose your moment. Other times though, thank goodness, it's not all doom and gloom. All right, this is a typical sort of wet season day on the Tiwis. Isolated storms, still could be embedded, overcast conditions, broken, scattered. All right, but you do need to take into account what's going on and the weather that's associated with this. All right. Now looking at that there, the thickness really seems to be up the back there, doesn't it? So what do you reckon about distance? Far enough away? What's the rule of thumb for distance away from a thunderstorm? I have 20, do I have 25, 30? Whatever. All right, it depends, doesn't it? It could be 35, 40, 50 miles. Right. I know Air North, Care Flight, aircraft that obviously can do that, they've been 50, 60 miles diversions around some of this weather. But not long after I took this video, we turned around and then the cockpit lit up. With a bolt of lightning right in front of us. I could have sworn we were way, way away. I wasn't even worried about it. But you remember that big cell? I can't see. You can see the darkness there. It's pretty dark back there. But I can't see how high that goes. All right, now you saw Hector before, it can go upwards of, I think it's at 60,000 odd feet. That's a pretty decent cell. No one's out climbing that other than SpaceX. Okay, so that bolt is going through that centre, all that energy out, down, it can pop out anywhere. All right, the monsoon. So this is now looking towards the south. Out over Impex, and now we start getting long periods of rain, moisture, like I said, the widespread cloud. Winds start to shift a little bit. It starts becoming more generally that northwesterly winds. All right, so runway 29 starts getting used a lot more, but runway 11 features every now and then. But we've got that monsoonal trough. All right, so if we have a look at that, the trough runs across the north of the top end, through Cairns, across through to Broome, and it starts to bring with it that moist, warm air from the equator in Indonesia. All right. When the monsoon's active, that's come down, we get all those conditions we just talked about, heavy rainfall, and the rain droplets are about that big. All right, they're about as big as your thumbnail. This is why it floods so quickly here, because it's not the little raindrops you usually get down south. All right, it's big raindrops. That's why we get inches of rain in no time. I've literally just stood there and watched my pool flood and overflow and run out into the street. All right, it gets wet quick. This is why GA is as big as it is, because half the roads out that way are all dirt. All right, they get flooded, access gets removed. The only way to get in and out is to fly. Owenpelly last year became an island. You could not drive in there at all. It was completely surrounded by water for a few weeks. All right, so that's the active monsoon. Then we'll have a monsoon break, and when that happens, the trough then retreats back up towards the equator, brings in sort of the rough, drier conditions, and goes back to a bit more build-uppy kind of weather again. Okay. So during this time, we can still get wind gusts. Like I said, we've still got bad low cloud, reduced fizz. Things can change quite quickly. And because of the low cloud, we don't have a lot of options as to where we're going to go and which way we can turn. All right. The other problem, of course, is any thunderstorms are there, it's not like in build-up, we can't see them usually. They're no longer isolated and standing out, they're embedded. So you now have to start going by what's coming out down the bottom. And this roll cloud sort of thing, it was kind of cool cloud, that one. It was quite still at that point, but closer to that, it started getting very rough and bumpy. All right. Here's a fairly active monsoon. Got all the widespread low cloud, rain. And what's the issue with this radar image as far as cloud goes? Doesn't really tell us, does it? We can only assume if there's rain, there's cloud. All right, but it's not telling us how low. So now if we're trying to go east, what have we got? What could we do? If we're going to plan a flight to Jabiru from Darwin there, apart from the fact that we're not going anywhere with the lightning like that, what could we use to help our decision making if there was a chance? Cameras, great, yep. So Jabiru has webcams, doesn't it? All right, so we can access the webcams. What else?
Have a look at the gap.
The gaff, absolutely. All right, now everyone writes off the gaff a little bit. I've got to look at you. All right, but it is useful. It does cover a wide area, but it does also break it down into smaller parts. So don't dismiss it completely. It's still good info, but we need to use that in combination with everything else. All right, what else have we got? Jabiru's TAF. Yeah. What about pilots at Jabiru? Ooh. All right, there might be a friendly operator out there that we can contact and ask, what's it like? Okay, I'm hoping if it was like that in Darwin, everyone else would share information. Okay, so we've got all those sort of things. We could get Met reports, we could call up, who else? One last one. Bureau of Met. Okay, there's a number on the bottom left corner of the gaff, and we can call them up. Don't call them up and go, hey, what's happening out there? And they go, have they read the gaff? And go, no. All right, make sure you read through it all first. So you always start with, hi, my name's Trent, I'm in Darwin, I've read the gaff, great piece of work, by the way. I'm trying to get to Jabiru, can you help me? All right, and then they'll go, oh, love to. All right, and then they've got a lot more latest sat data imagery and information that they can actually fine tune what's really going on there as well and help you out. Okay. All right, who was here for Marcus? Kev? Gary, what was it like?
Yeah, it was pretty rough.
Kev?
Yeah, it's pretty rough.
Yeah, stayed indoors? Right, so Tropical Cyclone Marcus, I just missed it. I got here in December, but some of my friends were here for it. And yeah, that was the last sort of cyclone that actually was a direct hit onto Darwin since Cyclone Tracy. So that was, what, 1974. So you can see the path. It went from a Cat 1, 2, came through. It was only Cat 2, did a bit of damage, then went to Cat 5 out over the ocean and then downgraded again. All right, so the strongest cyclone to hit, and it formed over the sea, and it was basically a tropical low. So cyclones start as tropical lows, and this is where they start going to a bit of a cyclone watch. All right, so who's seen on the Bureau of Met page the cyclone watch section? All right, if you haven't, go home tonight, tomorrow, whatever, show the family and friends where that information is. But it'll start to go, yeah, we've spotted a system that could be something to keep an eye on. Because usually when it goes from a low to a cyclone, it can happen within 24 to 48 hours. It happens reasonably quick. All right, and then there's a run on the dunny paper and everything at Coles again. Okay. Now, everyone's going, yeah, cool, well, why are we talking about cyclones? I'm not flying in a cyclone, it's pretty obvious, okay? But these things can happen very quickly. So outflow boundaries, microbursts, and cyclones. Everyone goes home on a Friday, doesn't tie down the aeroplane, doesn't lock the control locks because haven't had to for a while. Cyclone starts coming. All right, so we need to get into a habit of tying down aircraft now, securing our controls, rudders, whatever, double chocking. Down at MKT, we've got the aircraft 3 in the hangar. All right, we've got to make sure our guy ropes are angled because they're not quite lined up where the aeroplanes are, that are going to stop the twisting of the aeroplanes, because we've had that happen where a big squall's come through and they've pivoted in the hangar and made contact. So, like Hardy's, where they've got all the caravans there, you know, that might not be something they can keep doing because they're not going to stay there. These are obviously going to affect everything from Gove right the way through. So Groot, Gove, right across to Darwin, into the Cairns, of course, all across the top half of Australia, really. And even the other year, the one that went all the way down the coast to hit Kalbarri in WA. So what's the weather like outside of the cyclone? Because I've been flying when there's a cyclone been active, just not in it. Right? But what's it doing to everything out there? Right? There can still be winds, there can still be rain and low cloud and things. And it's a little bit sporadic because it's not a stabilised system necessarily. Right? So weather reporting and all that sort of stuff we need to keep an eye on a little bit more accurate. All right, who's heard of ENSO? This is getting into the hardcore theory stuff. All right, who's heard of El Nino and La Nina? All right. Anybody want to take over and talk about it for me? All right. So ENSO is the El Nino Southern Oscillation. And it is a natural weather event. It affects us right the way across the Pacific. So it's a Pacific Ocean phenomenon, if you want to call it that. And it affects South America right the way through to Indonesia and us here. Essentially what it is the trade winds blowing across, stirring up the warm air through Indonesia. It causes it to rain there and just keeps circulating through. So it's the cool air and it brings cool water down from the depths of the Pacific Ocean and pushes up the warmer water and makes rain. All right, but normally this stays in what we call a fairly neutral state. When we get into El Nino, that's the dry one, that's the bad one, or the one we don't necessarily want. All right, the winds push back the other way. It takes all the warmer water and the moisture over towards South America. It causes us to have reduced rainfall, what we call up here a crap wet, what they call down south bushfire season, okay, and quite dry. So that's El Nino. The opposite to this is La Nina, where the warm water is coming in, it's stirring up everything south of the equator in through Indonesia, and the MJO, or the Madden Julian Oscillation, which I'm not going to go into, it starts getting too full on, but that's an easterly breeze that then helps push that down as well, and that's what gives us a bumper wet. All right, and it's typically a 5 to 7 year sort of cycle where that will happen. All right, so El Nino, excessive heat, less cloud cover, less rain, but no storms, all right? Less storms, but they can be a little bit more vigorous and aggressive at times. Chance of cyclones usually decreased, all right, but we can still get good storms. And this is where we can have a bit of a pulse storm, or one that builds up really quite quickly, and that's the one that launched the DC-3 airborne and flew backwards a couple of years ago, jumped the chocks. It happened all very quickly. All right, so gusty conditions. La Nina, increased rainfall, flooding all across Australia, lots of water, lots of road closures, stronger cyclone activity in the northern half, but it will generally be wetter and cooler. So, what's going to happen this year? Well, $1 million question, isn't it? There's a bunch of weather models at the moment. 3 say it's going to be a strongish La Nina. Others are saying it's fairly inactive to a watch alert. At the end of the day, it's like the weatherman, weatherwoman says, we just do whatever, we go about our day and deal with it. All right. But this La Nina here, this is where it's going to get really, really wet. We actually went from a dry phase last year to quite a good wet. All right. The water and the waterfalls and all, they're only really just started to dry up now. All right. But it should be a fairly regular wet season this year, so nothing too chaotic, hopefully. All right. So let's have a look at a few scenarios. What do we notice here? Anyone see a friend? Follow the leader. All right. So here is a really good example of an inter, maybe a tempo. Now, when I say inter, what do you think? I say inter, you say 30 minutes. No. All right, 30 minutes of weather, and then what? When? Straight away. You don't know, do you? But what a lot of pilots think is, oh, I'll carry my 30 minutes of holding fuel, and then I'll land. But behind, all right? And this is a little bit different to down south or up here. Then often we have multiple waves of storms. And I couldn't find it for the life of me. I wanted to find it, but I've got this awesome photo of shower, break, shower, break, shower, break. And it's like inter, with 15 minutes there and 22 minutes there. You don't know, all right? And as we're going to have a look at in a minute, how many aeroplanes are trying to get into Darwin, annoying James, trying to get a clearance? And that's just the ones on those runways, because they have planned, they don't talk to each other. All right, who's zoinks? Going hard in the background. That's probably what they're saying. All right. So these are the things we've got to really start to think about. Now, if you look in there, what's going on at Darwin? There's a storm cell right over the top. All right. Then we've got the airliners, helicopters, everybody else that's not showing up. All right. So choosing a path can be challenging. So let's just say we're up the back here and we're working our way through. What's going to be going through your mind as you're approaching Darwin here? Let's work through this.
It's going to be hard to turn around.
Sorry, what was that?
It's going to be hard to turn around.
Going to be hard to turn around, potentially, yeah. So we need a back door, don't we? Always need a back door.
You might have legally taken your 30 minutes holding fuel, but all that traffic could take 40 minutes to get in.
Exactly, and we're going to see some better examples of that in a minute. All right, so what is my fuel on board? All right, and we'll talk about that more when we get to holding. But what fuel do you typically carry? You've got your en route fuel, you've got your final reserve. All right, what else do we have to carry as commercial pilots? What's what? I'm hearing a bit of variable, a bit of new words, contingency fuel. Yeah. What other sorts of fuel can we carry? Discretionary. What's that?
Any fuel you elect to put on board.
Yeah, that's your warm and fuzzy fuel. That's it's kind of approaching busy arrival time at Darwin fuel. Okay. It's different to allocate it and have it there versus just going, I've got 100 litres margin. Because if we don't allocate it, next minute it's gone. All right, so we've got to be careful about that. So it might just be that, and the last one is, as I talked about in the video the other week, is last light. It starts getting darker sooner when all this storm activity is there, blocking the sun and everything else. Okay. All right, heading to Bathurst. As I said, we need to give it some space. Could be up to 30 miles away. Now, if we're flying VFR, we don't really need to tell anybody. What about IFR? How do we handle that? We can't just head off wherever we want to, can we? How do we change our track or our route?
Request modifications.
Yep, how do we ask for it? Yeah, it would probably be on centre, maybe Darwin, in this case would be on centre. What would we ask for?
Traffic sheet wearing gold, request traffic for 20 miles right through.
Yep. Yep. We don't necessarily need to ask for traffic because we can just ask for 2 miles right of track due weather because that implies I'm IFR, I need to know the traffic. You're my ears. Happy? He's nodding, so it's okay. Yeah, all right, so yeah, we don't need to say request traffic. All right. The only time we really need to do is when we're on centre and we request traffic for climb to 8,000 because I can't request climb with centre. It's really the only one you'd ask for traffic for. Otherwise, you just ask for what you want. It's implied that I need traffic. So when you're doing that, how can I work out how many miles to the right do I need? Who's got Oz Romos and F-plane? Yeah. Who's got 2 fingers? Cool. So you go, and then you go, and then you get 22 miles wide. Right. Okay, well, if that's the edge of 22 miles, I need to go another 20 miles to the right of that. That's a decent diversion. Now, I'm not saying that's what that distance is, okay, but that's how we can work it out. From my intended path, how wide is the storm, then I can work a buffer there. And don't play in, little numbers. Oh, just request 2 miles right of route. Sometimes that might be okay, but just ask for 5 or 10. It's up to you. You don't have to use all of it. Right? But then we've still got our RMP tracking tolerances. So how do we know when we've reached 20 miles off track? How are we going to do that? There's a couple of ways. GPS, yeah. How are we going to set up the GPS? Yeah, well, that's a basic, I don't know how to work my GPS method, isn't it? We'll just use cross-track error. I'm not saying you take... Retraining, Kev. But no, 100%. There's a real simple way. It's just, and it is absolutely a method, because we did it the other day. We didn't need to set up anything else. But once you hit the full scale for en route, we're going to be 2 miles RMP2 or 5 miles if you've got a 129 GPS, which you probably shouldn't have, but it's still legal technically. Then yeah, we can count up to 5-10 miles cross-track error, and that will keep us off our intended path. What's another way? What's a bit more professional? Parallel. See, he's all right. Keep him on. Exactly. So again, depending on whether you're using a 430, 530, GTN, whatever, but have a look at parallel track. So what it does is sets your track and just puts it out. Magenta line goes out 20, 30 miles to the right. Then you can set a heading mode, and then if you want to as well, then you can arm your nav mode, so when you do actually hit 20, 30 miles cross-track error, it will intercept it and stop you going further out. So it acts like a gutter guard down the bowling alley. Cool party trick. All right, so have a look at that, how that works. Because that keeps it all professional, stops you falling asleep by accident and going through it further, because then there might be someone else avoiding the weather too, and then we have traffic separation issues. All right, lightning can be anywhere. All right, so giving it a good wide berth. There's those that have had a lightning strike, there's those that hasn't. But lightning behaves very, very differently. Right? I can tell you up in the flight levels, that it's the air density or something, it acts in slow motion. It does this, it's really cool. All right? I remember watching several storms and just the lightning is just totally different. Right? But it's going out and spitting out down the bottom below the cloud base where a lot of you are. So when you notice lightning, just take note of where it is and how regularly it is. And yeah, maybe I need to just come over this way a little bit more, and then you'll be okay. All right, here's a photo. What do we reckon? What are the conditions like there, do you think? I know it's just work with it. It's a bit hard to tell completely, but what would you guess? What was that, sorry? Yeah? Smooth? Rough? Bumpy? Yeah, bit of both? What do you reckon? You'd be okay flying through there? No? What about my path? I'm sort of heading this way, aren't I? Not too bad. It was rough as guts. It was really rough. Some days in the wet season are smooth out. Some of the best flying you ever do. We keep doing flight training. Not that I'm down at MKT much these days, but we still do flying down there. It was fine. But other times it can be really, really rough. Right, that's the same cell from 3 different viewpoints. An actual weather radar on board, good old Bureau of Met, indicating sort of different things, aren't they? All right, so we've got to be very, very careful. What are the issues with using our iPhones and iPads and stuff? Delay. So talk to me about this delay. How long?
6 minutes.
6 minutes is how long it takes to create the image, and then yeah, usually it's about 10 minutes cycling on your iPads or iPhones and stuff. That's how often it gets spat out by Bureau of Met. All right? So it's like a 3D kind of photo. So it does the horizontal one, then it does the next one, and there's the lower one, and then the next one up, and builds the image, and then it spits it out. And it takes about 6 minutes. And then we get it roughly 10 minutes, assuming you're with Telstra. All right, this is the big thing to remember. And even if you are with Telstra, you've got to make sure it's actually refreshing and it's not showing you something from when you left Darwin. All right, when you run through that middle area, Millingimby, Remo, all through there, it's terrible. It doesn't matter who you're with, unless you're with Starlink. You don't get much signal at all. So you need to be very careful that, does this look right? And usually it says up the top there, last updated 74 minutes ago. Oh, yeah, no, it's not updating. Turn it off, reset, try that, try your phone, hold it up out the window. Whoops, don't do that. Okay, so different cells looking different ways. So you can see there's red in that one, there isn't here. The next 10-minute blip, it went red. Now, the colorations can vary because of the, how they're choosing to represent things. But what I'm saying is the equivalent of red. It got thicker and darker and started really kicking off more, and it was really bumpy. All right, so again, what do we need to do if it starts getting really rough and bumpy? Slow down. To what? VA or? VB if we've got one. Yeah. All right. No, VA is manoeuvring speed. What's manoeuvring speed mean? Full abrupt control, right? If we have to drop a wing and pick it up quickly, and we're not going to overstress the airframe. Otherwise, if your aircraft has a VB published, then we use that. All right. What do you think about this one? So Darwin's surrounded by weather, aircraft doing donuts, trying to find a way, trying to hold and trying to get in. So that line is a waypoint called Le Pas, which is pretty much a 10-mile final into Darwin. And that's typically where the storms always rock up, right on final. It's a pain in the arse. So what would we be thinking there? What are our options? We'll assume that we're talking to approach. We're not on centre. Someone over here?
MKT is a bit of a blackout type thing.
Yeah, well there's Noonamar just to the south, but can we get in between that? All right. Now I've got some people go, oh, light green to darkish green's okay. As soon as it goes yellow, no go. Who thinks that? No one's going to say that. All right, I can tell you now, I've seen dark green, assuming it is actually dark green and hasn't evolved into yellow, but it's dark green is a pretty wild ride. Okay? So that is definitely not something you want to be doing. Assuming that's one cell and that's another cell, what else can go on?
Embedded.
Sorry?
Embedded storms.
Well, yeah, we'll assume it's embedded, but what could happen? Join up. So we start getting this single cells going to multi-cell scenario. All right, so we can assume, but then between there potentially is very, very rough. I've seen aircraft doing their thing coming out of Garden Point direction while I've been at Bathurst in relatively clear space. I'm like, oh God, I wouldn't have gone through there. All right, but you're going to be faced with these decisions. You can always give it a go, but you've got to be ready to turn out. And then you've got to hang on until you do get out. Okay? So these are all the things we need to be really, really mindful of. All right, late in the afternoon when everything's really, really happening. What do we notice there? Where is everybody? Over the coast. Why are they to the north, over the coast? Because the land is the heat source. That's where the weather's coming from, very clearly, isn't it? All right, it's running through Oampelly, Jamboree direction, right the way through and towards Darwin. So we can use this geographical phenomenon and this understanding to go, right, I'm not going to turn left when I'm heading west. I'm not going to go inland because things are most likely going to get worse. Unless you can see that. If it's built up and it's clear, that's fine. I'm talking about when it's all really happening. So the coast is generally going to be the better way to go. Anybody been in that sort of scenario that wants to share a story at all? Don't have to. No? All right, but this is a decision. So you can see it doesn't look like there's much cloud. I mean, I'm not saying who's VFR and IFR there, but I know a couple of those are VFR. But it looks like it's probably okay. There's probably a little bit of VFR on top there. That's all okay. All right.